We're going to pick up now talking about eukaryotic cells. And you can tell eukaryotic cells from a prokaryotic cell because they're going to have compartments. They have, just like, you have specialized organs throughout your body doing specialized jobs. Eukaryotic cells have specialized compartments that have specialized jobs or functions. So on the, what I've got here are examples of different eukaryotic organisms. These are all actually multicellular eukaryotic cells, but we can have single cell eukaryotes as well. So how do you tell a eukaryotic cell from a prokaryotic cell? Well, we've got eukaryote here, prokaryote here. In our previous lecture, I told you prokaryotes, no nucleus. The DNA is just floating around in the cytoplasm. And the internal structure is not really organized, right? You've got the cytoplasm and you've got like the ribosomes just floating around. Everything's just kind of open. So there's no organization there. And these are much, much smaller than eukaryotes. So I wish they had these actually on the same scale, but these are actually two different scales. So this is 500 nanometers and this is 1 micrometer. Nanometers are much smaller in scale than a micrometer. So let's take a look at how eukaryotic cells are different. So one, as we talked about previously, the DNA in a eukaryotic cell is a nucleus, so we can now see that structure here. They are bigger than prokaryotes. They're usually at least 10 times bigger. So much, much larger, and that has a lot to do with the fact that they have these specialized structures, these compartments, and those compartments we call organelles, or little organs. So these organelles are going to be having special jobs. We're going to take a look later on in this chapter at the different organelles and what jobs they're doing. And don't freak out. Here's where we're going to be going as far as all of those organelles. So we're going to be looking at animal cells. So I've even got my little stuffed cell. So here's our little animal cell and plant. So you can see, all of the different structures. We've got our nucleus. And these have a lot of structures in common. But we're also going to be talking about structures that are found in just the plant cell. Now don't panic and try and write all these down. We're going to go through all of the different structures and talk about what functions they have. So we're going to see what the different jobs are and how these work together. Now, in previous lecture, looked at prokaryotes. We've seen a little bit now about eukaryotes. So which of these is a feature or a structure not found in a prokaryote? Since we're going to be now focusing on eukaryotes. So which of these is not found in a prokaryote? And hopefully you selected B. That is, again, the big difference between a prokaryote and a eukaryote. So you can tell the difference between these two by their size and if there's a nucleus or not. And very often you can see the nucleus in a cell because it's one of the bigger structures inside of these cells. All right. Now, before we get completely away from the prokaryotes, I do want to talk just a little bit about how way deep down we may be part bacteria. So we may be part prokaryote. And how can that be the case? How can we be part prokaryote? I mean, we're made out of eukaryotic cells. We're multicellular eukaryotic cells. Well, it comes down to another theory. So in my previous video, I talked about the cell theory. Well, now we're going to talk about the endosymbiosis theory. So first, let's take a look at the name. So endo, so what does endo sound like? It sounds like in, right? So endo means in, and then symbiosis means together, to live together. So this is the living together or living inside theory. This theory was developed to explain the presence of two organelles that are found in eukaryotes. Chloroplasts in the plants and the algae, and mitochondria that are found in both plants and animals. So these two organelles don't share a lot in common with the eukaryotic cells that they're found in. They're found inside of them, but they have some strange characteristics. So let's take a look at the support and what it is about these that are weird and odd. So both chloroplasts and mitochondria, when we look at those two organelles, they're actually very similar in size to prokaryotic cells. So the mitochondria and the chloroplasts have the same size as individual prokaryotic cells. Not only that, we now know after some time that they divide by the same process that prokaryotes use. So when we talk later on about cell division, they're going to use that same exact cell process to divide that prokaryotes use. So they don't divide the same way as a eukaryotic cell does. And they can divide on their own. So that's kind of cool. Not only that, they have their own DNA. They are the only organelle in the cell other than the nucleus that has their own DNA. And not only that, their DNA is circular. Remember, prokaryotes have circular DNA, right? Eukaryotic cells have linear DNA. So what do I mean by that? Let me grab my pen. So prokaryotes pack their DNA in circles. Eukaryotes pack their DNA linearly, right? So the fact that these guys have circular DNA like prokaryotes is actually a big deal. Not only that, they have their own ribosomes. So inside of the chloroplasts and the mitochondria, not only do they have their own DNA, they have their own ribosomes, which is weird. No other organelle has their own set of ribosomes inside, right? We have ribosomes in the cell, but these guys have their own ribosomes inside. And so all of this evidence and some more, there's like biochemical evidence and things like that, supports the idea of endosymbiosis. And this is what endosymbiosis is saying. Back in the day when these cells were all roaming around, we had an ancestor to eukaryotes that had linear DNA, so you can see it's a string. Didn't have a nucleus probably yet. That came later. But cells ate each other all the time, just like they do today. And so the ancestral eukaryote engulfed a prokaryote, an ancestral prokaryote. In this case, that was really good at taking food and oxygen and making it into energy. Now, normally that little guy would get digested, but by some fluke, it didn't. Instead, they worked and lived together. And over time, this little prokaryote ended up transforming into a mitochondria, right? And so that engulfed prokaryote evolved into a mitochondria or a chloroplast, depending on which kind of cell it got engulfed by. The other thing that we've got here that indicates that this mitochondria is like this ancestral prokaryote, is when it got eaten, it would have gotten wrapped up in an extra membrane. And these guys have two membranes. You can see it's got one on the inside and one on the outside. So it had the one that it came in with, and then you can see, it doesn't show it here in this picture, but you can see the membrane bends in. That's because that's how the cells eat each other. They wrap each other up in membranes and then use that as a little tiny stomach. So having two membranes is another indication that these were bacteria at some point.